Welcome to the podcast, Jessica. We're delighted to have you on. We really, really enjoyed your book. It was full of insights, and you had Sharon and I debating for many afternoons, discussing what style we were and our childhood and the kind of men that we've attracted. Um, what I'd first like to start with is how you came about writing this book and a bit about your story and your experience in relationships.
Sure. I think that, I came to wanting to express this to the general public because of my own personal struggles. And as a professional who's been in the field for a really long time and seeing other people struggle and going through it personally, I was like, wow, I need to get this information out there. And so I struggled in a lot of my relationships with codependency and anxious attachment and just kind of like feeling bewildered by relationships and how to sustain them and what was coming up for me. And it was just very painful and confusing. And as I healed and continue to heal, because I think it's an ongoing journey, I studied imago therapy, which is a type of relationship therapy that, as therapists, as we can get trained in, it's a couples counseling modality. And I learned so much from my own personal experience with it, but also being an imago therapist with clients. And I was like, wow, like, how can I get this information around what's going on in relationships? What's really talking in a language where people can start to not feel crazy or start to understand if they're shutting down or if their partner is reacting or behaviors are coming up. And so I was like, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to explain this energy and this pain and the misery and the wonderfulness of relationships and what might be really going on with someone based on my own personal experience and years of seeing things work and transpire in my clinical office.
So tell us a bit, because for our listeners, lots of people don't know what attachment style theory is. And in fact, I only came across it. I had a relationship about 18 months ago and we were together for 6 months. And he sort of introduced me to the concept, but I'd never heard of it before then. So tell us what attachment style theory is.
Yeah, so it was came up in the 1950s. John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, two pioneers, discovered that when we're really young in the womb and those primary years, how we adapted to our primary caregivers. And it's very kind of layered and hard to kind of really categorize, but we can either form a secure attachment, which is we get a lot of attunement, we get our needs met, there's a co-regulation, there's a dance between primary caregiver and child, where you learn an inherent trust in the world and you are okay with space, and you're okay with getting close, and like those, like moving in and out of those transitions in relationship don't seem to dysregulate you or feel threatening to you to a degree. And then there's three insecure types. There's anxious, there's fearful, and there's avoidant. And all of these are insecure. So what does that mean? It means when I get too close, things come up, or when I start to feel abandoned, things get activated. So basically, the nervous system is primed to not feel safe and to feel threat in certain situations, primarily when it comes to romantic love. But any close bond can bring up these adaptations and reactions in your nervous system. So once you start to understand, okay, wow, all of this craziness is going on inside of me, and a lot of somatic, like what I mean by that sensational experiences, we start to kind of put the flashlight on. Okay, there might be some attachment healing that needs to take place because the old wounds, what we call implicit wounds or sensational wounds, are showing up in your romantic day-to-day life, and you are not crazy for this. This is really where attachment starts to kind of show where it needs some work and some understanding and compassion.
So, how would you know if you were someone that was anxiously attached? And what is the difference between being anxiously attached and the normal kind of dance of courtship? Do you know what I mean? Like, so when someone pulls away, you want them more. How much of that is kind of natural and how much is to do with your attachment style?
Yeah, so I think the degree in which you viscerally feel it in your body is a good indicator of whether or not you have anxious attachment. Usually more prone to abandonment and hyper vigilant. codependency, which I don't love the word because we could get into that and we don't have to, but the traits of being hypervigilant, being able to sense into other people's bodies, knowing what other people's needs are prior to your needs. Those are adaptive strategies that someone who's more anxious used early on to track their mother or their primary caregiver. So instead of being seen into and having that sense of safety, we actually can sense the need of others more, and we can lose ourselves in relationship. And if that abandonment or that selfless state, which is what I talk about in the book, gets activated, there is usually a visceral response, something in your gut, something, you can start to feel very, very scared. And that's usually a sign that you were very young and you felt those sensations before. So there's a lot of indicators. And I would say anyone who identifies as having codependent traits, really, when we boil that down, it's really attachment that we're looking at. And it's probably more, we call it ambivalent attachment, but anxious attachment for the general public.
It's quite interesting. I mean, there's a few things going through my head. Number one is like perhaps we're too attached to each other. I don't know if there's a there's a saying for that, because Lauretta and I were brought up together, obviously sisters, but we're more like twins really, and we do still live together. We both got divorced and then we sort of combined families. I mean, we didn't plan it that way, but it's just the way it's worked out. So there's a few things that's going on. So I always thought, just to delve a little bit into the anxious attachment and what it really means. So I always thought that I was, I don't know, pretty together or pretty level-headed, quite a strong person. But your book brought up quite a lot for me, because I then started to look at patterns in relationships. So, and the type of men, and you talk about this in your book as well, the type of men that I have been attracted to, and they have similar qualities. They woo me in quite a particular way, so it's a bit around the kind of love bombing type scenario. And then I'm kind of being chased. I thought this was everybody's experience, like the male chasing the woman thing and the woman pulling back. And then this has been my experience. And the man chases the woman. I thought this was universal. And then it's all like, oh my God, I love you quite quickly. And then I'm very defensive. But then when I feel that they are crazy in love with me, then I love them back. And then I feel them pulling away. And then I'm a neurotic mess. I don't know whether this is everybody. And I thought, and when I've shared this with other girlfriends, there has been a lot of kind of, well, yeah, it's a bit like that. Men are all like that at the beginning and then they pull away. And I was like, but maybe it's more to do with my attachment style, that I'm recreating that. And I ended up marrying and now divorcing, I mean, such a narcissist. And I don't see myself as a people pleaser, or some of the things that you described as anxiously attached, I do a bit of, but not to that extreme. So just tell us a little bit about the dance of what I've been experiencing and what does that really mean?
Yeah, I mean, so sometimes if your brain wasn't bathed in a lot of of the neurochemicals early on in childhood, you can meet someone and the love bombing feels really good.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot being released and there's a fantasy attached to that. And that can be hard when you're in it to discern what is this as chemicals and what is this as logic. And so you guys can taken away, myself included, by the oneness of that feeling, and feeling you're getting the attention that maybe you always needed and you didn't get. There's so much involved. And so the healthier you get, the less likely the love bombing will feel appealing.
Okay.
But it's the more you, how do I say this, shift into a place of receiving that healthy connection and care from others, and realizing I think a healthy relationship can have that in the beginning, but not to that extreme. And so if it's not an equal exchange of real intimacy, of really sharing, and it's just chasing until the attachment takes place, and then that's when intimacy actually starts. So that's when they start to pull away. So as soon as your little me says, okay, I'm in, I feel safe.
Yeah.
We're going to try this. They're like, whoa. Now their little me is activated and they're running in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And
that's
so
what I've had a lot.
true intimacy is never really able to kind of manifest or be created because you're both in the distancer pursuer kind of dance, and you're not alone. And yeah, it's typical to kind of have someone with more narcissistic traits like idealize you, chase you, pursue you, and then once they get you, that dopamine drops so much in their system that they don't want to continue. So then they start to pull away, and then it activates all your abandonment wounds all over again. And so it's really painful to be in that kind of dynamic. But I think when you do understand the neuroscience behind it, it starts to make sense. And when we can start to make sense of things, we can start to heal them and start to look at them differently. And when we do heal, who we are attracted to actually changes. And so the love bombing might not feel as appealing. It might even feel overwhelming and not as like a steady kind of slow getting to know and slow intimacy building that's necessary for, equal sharing versus just the chase.
I think that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's going on with the avoidant attachment? So what kind of environment would they have been brought up in to make them, as soon as you get intimate, they want to run?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's complicated because you can be anxious with avoidant protectors, but a true avoidant attachment didn't get emotional intimacy and emotionally seen into when they were a baby. So no one saw into their world enough. So they didn't develop that ability to understand their own emotional experience and be with their emotions. So they're avoidant of them. So then when you show emotions in a relationship towards them, they can't handle that experience inside of themselves and what comes up inside of themselves. So they either run away or shut down. It becomes too overwhelming for them. And they don't know how to actually depend on others and be vulnerable in that way. So they learn to be like little islands. So anxious people want to co-regulate. We want to talk it out. We want to get back into connection to feel safe. They want to separate to feel safe and regulate their nervous system. So both people are trying to find safety in these adaptive strategies to like either run away or run towards. That only perpetuates the anxiety for the other person, never getting back into like connection. So an avoidant person really struggles with being vulnerable, with accessing more of their emotional self, and they probably didn't get seen into emotionally as a young person and learned to be kind of isolated and that they had to do everything on their own.
Yeah, and that's interesting because there was one bit, but I can't remember the names, but a particular couple that you talk about in the book that you were counselling, and I sort of relayed this back to you. Well, one was the youngest of four. It could actually even be the same person, and I'm the youngest of four, so I was relating loads. But she said that her partner, and I remember one particular partner, really loved her when she was kind of sassy and ballsy and confident. But when she showed a weaker side, a more vulnerable, needy side, it really turned him off. And I remember I said to you about Adam, and I remember one particular boyfriend, and I really experienced that. And to the point where I was like, I don't want to show him that I'm upset about something. I want to continue being this cool person that he first saw me as, because I can instinctively feel when I'm vulnerable, needy, upset, it completely turns it off. And I think he might have even said it to me. I can't remember. But so that would be me being anxiously attached, I presume, and him being avoidant or a bit of a narcissist. I don't know.
I mean, that would be you being human.
Yeah.
And having a very human part and meeting another human who isn't capable of being present with that part because he hasn't met that in himself yet.
Right. Okay.
So we're all mirrors to a degree. And like the deeper we can hold these parts of ourselves or bring them to people who have the capacity, the more likely, we'll attract more and more of those people. But if someone hasn't met the vulnerable parts of themselves, which is an avoidant, they're going to really struggle when they see that externalized, because it's going to be like, ooh, like she's bringing up something inside of me and I don't want to deal with that. So I'm going to push it away. And essentially they're pushing a part of themselves away. But in the 3D world, they're pushing you away.
Yeah. Okay. Go on. Sorry.
And can you be both? Because sometimes I felt like I could be anxiously detached and sometimes attached.
Oh, sorry, I think you said detached.
No. And sometimes I felt like I could be avoidant. Is that possible with different people?
I mean, there's two ways to answer that question. One, attachment is a two-way street. So it's two people's embedded patterns making up a relational pattern. So depending on who you attach to, you have your patterns, they have their patterns, and that's going to play out in a relational dance. And two, you can be primary anxious, but you can have avoidant protectors.
Yeah.
So if you turn up your volume and you know that about you, and we call that the maximizer, or in my book, I talked about it being the octopus. But one of your protectors is, I can do this all on my own. This is too much. You might still be anxious, but you have this protector in you that when it gets a little too intense, I'm going to pull away.
Yeah.
So that's very different than, an avoidant pulling away. So it's layered and it's complicated. And I wish the categories could really describe it all. I've shown up avoidant in earlier years in a relationship too, and with someone with a bigger abandonment wound than me, which is hard to find, but I did. It's going to feel overwhelming, right? And so it's complicated, and you can show up differently, but primarily the best way to understand is, do you usually self-abandon to meet the needs of others? Do you maximize your energy? That is usually more on the anxious side, and the avoidant side usually they're also in a sympathetic state, but they usually move away. And so they're avoiding intimacy with another person because that's scary. Oh, that vulnerable part is showing up. I don't want to go there, so I'm going to move away. And you can have layers of both show up, and it can be very confusing. But a lot of people are like, yeah, I have both. Both of those sides come up, and they can come up in different ways.
Yeah, because sometimes it's dependent on going back to the point of like, how much is it attachment style and how much is it the beginning stages of wooing. And I think you answered that sort of saying it, like obviously there is always a beginning stage, a kind of falling in love stage, but if it's the love bombing, if it's that intensity, that's more likely to be attachment style playing out rather than just that kind of normal wooing courtship thing.
Yeah, I think that, a big piece with that love bombing is idealization and putting you on a pedestal. And, we live in cultures where we have re-romanticized the fairy tale, and that the other person's perception of you is they don't really know you yet.
Yeah.
They know what they think they know of you, and they're in love with the idea of you. And the truth is, there's so many parts to you. And those parts can only be slowly revealed to another person over time. So that chase is really an illusion in a lot of ways. And so it feels good. If you have that need, it can feel really good, but it's also devastating because, you're a little girl, your little me is like, okay, this person really wants me. They're really there. And they can't get past the illusion or the honeymoon phase of the relationship. When things or rupture or conflict comes up, they struggle because of what's going on inside of them as well.
You also said in your book that anxious attachments are rising and secure attachments are decreasing. Do we know why that's happening?
Yeah, I think it's a lot to do with our culture and the transactional nature in which we're treating relationships, not really understanding rupture repair. It also has to do with our culture is a little more left shifted. So we're operating more from the left hemisphere of our brain. Things are more transactional. We're doing a lot more screen time. We're raised in a world where we're not connecting deeply enough in the same ways that we used to. So there's an increase in anxiety in general in our climate. And so when you ever have anxiety in general, it's harder to have safe connection that's formed from like a ventral place of deepening and true intimacy. And that's just sadly the direction that we're moving in, is as we move towards this very like hustle, autonomy, like capitalism, like all of that is culturally or biologically against what we are inherently needing, which is connection. That's our biological imperative. And it's really sad. It's actually a big piece of my next book on why we're moving in that direction and how to kind of shift out of it, which takes a little bit of work because of how we're programmed.
Yeah, and let's not talk about AI because that puts the fear of God in me, and I just can't do it. My friend started talking about it in our book club, and I said, robots is just, I just can't go there.